You think you know what happened when the Reich fell. Trials, executions, justice served. The men got the headlines, Nuremberg, the gallows, history's judgment. But thousands of women wore the SS uniform too. They ran the camps, selected who lived and died, turned cruelty into a career. When the guns went silent in May 1945, where did they go? What happened to the female guards who made the Holocaust possible? The answer isn't what you expect. Most didn't hang. Most didn't even go to prison. They melted back into German society like they'd never left. Some became teachers. Others, nurses. A few opened shops in quiet towns where nobody asked questions about the war years. The most wanted war criminals of the 20th century became your neighbor, your child's teacher, the woman who sold you bread. If you value documented historical research like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual. Using sources from the Nuremberg trial records and the Central Office for the Investigation of National Socialist Crimes. Now back to the story. Ravensbrück concentration camp alone employed over 3,000 female guards between 1939 and 1945. Auschwitz had 800, Bergen-Belsen 500. Across all camps, historians estimate 15,000 women served as SS guards, block leaders, and camp administrators. These weren't clerks filing papers. They selected prisoners for gas chambers, conducted medical experiments, beat women and children to death with their bare hands. The recruitment started early. In 1939, the SS published newspaper advertisements seeking women for essential war work at resettlement facilities. The pay was attractive, 150 Reichsmarks per month, plus room, board, and vacation time. Compare that to a factory worker's 70 marks or a teacher's the 120. For young women from poor families, it was financial freedom. Training began at Ravensbrück under Johanna Langefeld, the chief warden. New recruits learned camp hierarchy, prisoner categories, and discipline procedures. They practiced searches, roll calls, and punishment techniques. The curriculum included racial theory, explaining why prisoners deserved no mercy. After 3 weeks, they were ready for deployment. The women who applied came from all walks of life. Hertha Ehlert was a baker's daughter from Berlin. Irma Grese grew up on a dairy farm in Mecklenburg. Maria Mandel trained as a postal worker in Austria. They weren't social outcasts or criminal deviants. They were ordinary German women who saw an opportunity and took it. When Allied forces liberated the camps in 1945, they found the evidence everywhere. Mountains of corpses, gas chamber blueprints, meticulously kept death records. The guards tried to run. Most didn't make it far. British forces arrested Irma Grese at Bergen-Belsen on April 15, 1945. She was 21 years old and had personally sent thousands to their deaths. American troops captured Ilse Koch at Buchenwald 3 days later. She'd earned the nickname the Witch of Buchenwald for her collection of lampshades made from human skin. The trials began immediately. The Nuremberg International Military Tribunal started in November 1945. But most female guards faced military courts in the zones where their camps operated. The British tried 45 women at the Bergen-Belsen trial. The Americans prosecuted 61 at Dachau. The French handled Natzweiler-Struthof. Each Allied power ran their own justice system with their own rules. The British Bergen-Belsen trial opened on September 17, 1945, in Lüneburg. Prosecutor Colonel T.M. Backhaus presented evidence against 11 female defendants. The courtroom heard testimony about systematic murder, medical experiments, and torture. Witness after witness described guards who laughed while prisoners died, who kicked pregnant women until they miscarried, who set dogs on children for sport. Irma Grese took the stand on October 24th. She admitted to carrying a whip and pistol, but denied killing anyone. "I was only following orders," she repeated. Prosecutors showed photographs of emaciated corpses, read death certificates she had signed, presented testimony from dozens of survivors who identified her as their tormentor. The evidence was overwhelming. The verdict came on November 17th. Grese was sentenced to death, along with 10 other defendants. She showed no emotion as the judge read her sentence. British authorities transferred her to Hameln prison to await execution. She spent her final weeks writing letters to her family and reading romance novels. On December 13th, 1945, at 8:07 in the morning, executioner Albert Pierrepoint hanged her. She was 22 years old, but Grese's execution was exceptional. Here's where the story gets dark. Of the estimated 15,000 female SS guards, only about 800 faced trial. That's 5%. The rest simply walked away. Allied forces were overwhelmed with millions of displaced persons, collapsed infrastructure, and the immediate threat of Soviet expansion. Hunting down every camp guard wasn't the priority. Many guards had already fled eastward as Soviet forces advanced. then doubled back through American or British lines claiming to be refugees. The chaos of defeated Germany provided perfect cover. Identification papers could be destroyed or forged. Former guards claimed to be nurses, teachers, or housewives displaced by bombing. Without camp uniforms or SS documentation, they blended into the millions of German civilians seeking shelter and food. The denazification process, designed to remove Nazi influence from German society, was a catastrophic failure when it came to female guards. The system focused on party officials, military officers, and industrial leaders. Low-ranking camp personnel often escaped scrutiny entirely. Women filled out questionnaires claiming they had worked in kitchens or laundries, never mentioning their guard duties. With limited resources and competing priorities, Allied investigators rarely checked these claims. Take the case of Herta Botha, a guard at Stutthof and Bergen-Belsen. British forces captured her in 1945 and sentenced her to 10 years imprisonment. She was released early in 1951 for good behavior. Botha returned to her hometown in Lower Saxony, married, and worked as a seamstress. She lived quietly until her death in 2008. Her neighbors knew nothing about her wartime service. Or consider Hildegard Lechert, known as Bloody Brigitte, at Ravensbrück and Majdanek. She beat prisoners with clubs, selected them for gas chambers, and conducted medical experiments. Polish authorities arrested her in 1945 and sentenced her to 15 years. She was released in 1956, returned to West Germany, and found work in a textile factory. She married and raised 2 children, never discussing her past. When Nazi hunters tracked her down in 1975, she claimed she had only worked in camp kitchens. The numbers tell the real story. Of the 800 female guards who faced trial, about 200 received death sentences. Most of these were commuted to prison terms as post-war attitudes shifted and Cold War priorities took precedence. By 1955, fewer than 50 women remained in prison for war crimes. The rest had been released, their sentences reduced for good behavior or health reasons. The West German government, established in 1949, had little appetite for hunting war criminals. Chancellor Konrad Adenauer's administration prioritized economic recovery and NATO integration over prosecuting the past. The statute of limitations for most war crimes was set at 20 years, meaning prosecutions had to begin by 1965. Most didn't. Justice Minister Fritz Schäffer actively discouraged investigations, arguing that continued prosecutions would undermine German morale and democratic development. This policy had deadly consequences for justice. Thousands of former guards lived freely while their victims struggled with trauma and poverty. Survivors who recognized their tormentors on German streets faced a choice: pursue legal action through an unsympathetic system, or try to rebuild their shattered lives. Most chose the latter. The ones who got away built new lives with terrifying ease. Hermann Braunsteiner worked as a guard at Ravensbrück and Majdanek, where she kicked prisoners to death with her steel-toed boots. Guards called her the Stomping Mare. She escaped to Austria after the war, married an American soldier named Russell Ryan, and emigrated to Queens, New York in 1959. She worked as a housewife for 14 years, attended church socials, and volunteered at local charities before Nazi hunters tracked her down. The investigation began in 1964 when survivor Giza Weisblum saw Braunsteiner's photograph in a German newspaper. Weisblum had been a prisoner at Majdanek and remembered the guard who kicked her pregnant sister to death. She contacted Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal, who launched an investigation. By 1971, prosecutors had collected testimony from 68 survivors identifying Braunsteiner as a killer. The extradition battle lasted 2 years. Braunsteiner fought deportation, claiming she was now an American citizen and couldn't be tried for crimes committed before her naturalization. The case reached the Supreme Court, which ruled in 1973 that naturalized citizens could lose their citizenship if they had lied on their applications about war crimes. Braunsteiner was stripped of her citizenship and extradited to West Germany. Her trial in Düsseldorf lasted 5 years, from 1975 to 1980. Prosecutors presented evidence that she had murdered hundreds of prisoners at Majdanek and participated in selections for the gas chambers. Witnesses testified that she would kick prisoners in the stomach and genitals with her steel-toed boots until they died from internal bleeding. The court sentenced her to life imprisonment, but she served only 6 years before being released on medical grounds in 1986. She died in 1999, having spent more time as a free woman in America than in prison for her crimes. Others went deeper underground. The Catholic Church provided escape routes through the rat lines, the same networks that smuggled male war criminals to South America. Bishop Alois Hudal in Rome issued false identity papers to fleeing Nazis, claiming they were political refugees fleeing communist persecution. At least 300 female guards are believed to have reached Argentina, Chile, and Brazil between 1946 and 1952. In Argentina, former guards found work as nannies for wealthy families, teachers in German schools, or clerks in businesses owned by German immigrants. The Peron government welcomed German immigrants, asking few questions about their wartime activities. Buenos Aires had an active German community that provided support networks for new arrivals. Some married locals and raised families. Never speaking about their war service, their children grew up bilingual, learning Spanish and German, unaware of their mothers, on past. When these women died, their secrets died with them. Only occasionally did evidence surface, a trunk of German documents, a photograph in SS uniform, a confession to a priest or family member. If you value documented historical research like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the Nuremberg trial records and the Central Office for the Investigation of National Socialist Crimes. Now back to the story. Back in Germany, former guards found work in the rebuilding economy. The country desperately needed teachers, nurses, and administrators. Background checks were minimal, and references could be forged. Many guards had training in healthcare or education from before the war, making them attractive candidates for these positions. A 1949 survey by the American military government found that over 60% of teachers in Bavaria had been Nazi Party members. How many had served in camps was never determined, but the percentage was likely significant. These women taught German children about democracy and human rights, while hiding their own participation in genocide. The medical field proved particularly attractive to former guards. Many had gained experience in camp hospitals and medical facilities, though their training in Dachau involved participating in human experiments and selections. They found work as nurses, medical assistants, and hospital administrators. Some opened private practices or worked in public health agencies. The irony was devastating. Women who had participated in medical murder now cared for the sick and wounded. Consider Vera Wolof, who worked as a secretary and interpreter at the Majdanek extermination camp. She helped coordinate the transport and murder of over 78,000 prisoners. After the war, she returned to her hometown in Bavaria, married, and worked as a translator for the American military government. She later found employment with a medical supply company, traveling throughout Germany to hospitals and clinics. She died in 1994, having never faced prosecution for her role in mass murder. The Central Office for the Investigation of National Socialist Crimes, established in Ludwigsburg in 1958, focused primarily on major cases and male perpetrators. Female guards were considered secondary targets, their crimes somehow less significant than those of male officers and administrators. This gender bias reflected broader societal attitudes that viewed women as naturally less violent and more likely to be following orders rather than giving them. When investigations did focus on female perpetrators, they often revealed horrific details that challenged these assumptions. The trial of 6 former female guards from Auschwitz in 1963 exposed systematic torture, medical experiments, and mass murder. Witness testimony described guards who competed to see who could beat prisoners to death fastest, who laughed while children died, who volunteered for the most brutal assignments. Yet, even faced with overwhelming evidence, courts showed remarkable leniency toward female defendants. Sentences were consistently shorter than those given to male perpetrators for similar crimes. Appeals were more likely to succeed and early releases more common. The message was clear: female violence was somehow less threatening, less deserving of punishment than male violence. This double standard extended to public perception as well. Media coverage of war crimes trials focused primarily on male defendants, treating female perpetrators as curiosities rather than serious criminals. Headlines emphasized their gender rather than their crimes. Blonde Beast of Belsen, or The Woman with the Whip, turning them into sensational figures rather than accountability cases. The hunt for female war criminals continued sporadically through the 1970s and 80s. Nazi hunters like Simon Wiesenthal, Beate Klarsfeld, and Serge Klarsfeld tracked down dozens of former guards living quiet lives across Europe and the Americas. But prosecutions were rare and sentences light. Most women were elderly by then, and courts showed remarkable sympathy for their age and health conditions. The case of Dorothea Binz illustrates both the potential and limits of post-war justice. As head guard at Ravensbrück, she personally selected prisoners for execution, beat them with whips and clubs, and oversaw medical experiments. She was known for her cruelty even among other guards, earning the nickname the Beast of Ravensbrück. British forces captured Binz on May 2, 1945, as she tried to flee toward the American zone. She was 24 years old and had been head guard for 3 years. During interrogation, she admitted to her role in selections and punishments, but claimed she was following orders and trying to maintain discipline. Her trial began in Hamburg on December 5, 1946. Prosecutors presented testimony from 47 survivors who identified her as their torturer. They described how she would beat pregnant women until they miscarried, how she selected sick prisoners for extermination, how she laughed while children died. The evidence was overwhelming and undisputed. The court sentenced Binz to death on February 2nd, 1947. She appealed the sentence, claiming she had been coerced into her actions and had tried to help prisoners when possible. The appeal was denied. On May 2nd, 1947, exactly 2 years after her capture, British executioner Albert Pierrepoint hanged her at Hamel Prison. She was 26 years old, but Binz's execution was exceptional. Her assistant guards, equally complicit in mass murder, received prison terms and were released by 1955. The hierarchy of justice reflected the hierarchy of the camps, but it missed the fundamental truth about the Holocaust. It required thousands of willing participants at every level. This pattern of unequal justice had lasting consequences. It allowed dangerous myths to persist about female participation in Nazi crimes. It suggested that women were less culpable, less violent, more likely to be victims than perpetrators. These myths made it easier for society to avoid confronting the reality that ordinary people, including women, could commit extraordinary evil. The psychological impact on survivors was devastating. Many had been tortured by female guards who seemed to take particular pleasure in their cruelty. To see these women escape punishment while male perpetrators faced death sentences added another layer of trauma. Justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about acknowledgement, about society recognizing the crimes committed and holding perpetrators accountable. Some guards tried to justify their actions in post-war interviews and memoirs. They claimed ignorance about the final solution, insisting they thought camps were for political prisoners or criminals. They said they were just following orders, that refusing would have meant their own imprisonment or death. They insisted they tried to help prisoners when possible, sharing food or providing medical care. These claims rarely held up under scrutiny. Camp guards received detailed training about prisoner categories and camp purposes. They were explicitly told that prisoners were enemies of the state who deserved no mercy. They witnessed daily executions, selections for gas chambers, and medical experiments. The idea that they were ignorant of the camp's murderous purpose was simply not credible. The following orders, our co-ord defense was equally hollow. Guards volunteered for their positions and could request transfers to other duties. Many did leave camp service when they found it too stressful or morally troubling. Those who stayed made a choice to participate in genocide day after day, month after month, year after year. The reality was simpler and more damning. Most female SS guards volunteered for their positions because the pay was good, the benefits substantial, and the work gave them power over life and death. They knew what they were signing up for. Camp duty wasn't a secret assignment. It was advertised as essential war work with excellent compensation. Once deployed, female guards integrated into the camp hierarchy with deadly efficiency. They ran roll calls that lasted hours in freezing weather. Designed to kill prisoners through exposure, they supervised work details that were calculated to exhaust prisoners to death. They selected prisoners for punishment, medical experiments, and execution based on quotas from their superiors. The daily routine of murder became normalized through bureaucracy and repetition. Guards punched time clocks, filled out forms, followed standard procedures for killing human beings. The banality of evil transformed genocide into a career, complete with performance reviews, vacation time, and retirement benefits. Modern research has revealed the staggering scope of female participation in Nazi crimes. Studies of camp personnel records show that women comprised nearly 20% of concentration camp staff. They held key positions throughout the camp hierarchy. From block leaders to head guards to administrative supervisors, without their participation, the Holocaust machinery could not have functioned. Yet even today, many former guards remain unpunished. Age and death have closed most cases, but investigations continue when evidence surfaces. In 2015, German prosecutors charged Oskar Gröning, the bookkeeper of Auschwitz, as an accessory to murder. He was 93 years old. Similar efforts to prosecute elderly female guards have been less successful, partly due to the difficulty of proving specific crimes after 70 years. The last major prosecution of a female camp worker occurred in 2022. Irmgard Furchner, a 97-year-old former secretary at Stutthof concentration camp, was tried in Itzehoe, Germany, for accessory to murder in over 11,000 cases. She fled before the trial began but was captured hours later and brought to court in a wheelchair. Prosecutors argued that, as a secretary, Furchner had typed deportation orders, maintained prisoner records, and coordinated the camp's murderous operations. She was an essential cog in the killing machine, they claimed, making her legally responsible for the deaths of prisoners processed through her office. The defense argued that Furtner was merely a teenage clerk following orders, with no knowledge of the camp's true purpose. They claimed she had been coerced into her position and had no choice but to perform her assigned duties. The trial lasted over a year, with testimony from survivors and historians about conditions at Stutthof and the role of administrative staff in mass murder. In December 2022, the court found Furtner guilty of accessory to murder and sentenced her to 2 years probation. She never served time in prison. The sentence was seen as largely symbolic, given her age and the impossibility of meaningful punishment. She died in early 2023, one of the last Nazi perpetrators to face justice. This lenient treatment reflects a broader pattern in post-war justice that continues today. While some male Nazi leaders faced execution or long prison terms, female perpetrators often escaped with lighter sentences or no punishment at all. The reasons were complex: limited evidence, changed priorities, gender bias, and simple passage of time. But the result was clear. Most female participants in the Holocaust lived free and unpunished lives after the war. The implications extend far beyond individual cases. The failure to prosecute female war criminals sent a dangerous message about the nature of justice and accountability. It suggested that some crimes were more serious than others, that some perpetrators were more guilty than others, that gender could excuse participation in genocide. It also allowed a pernicious myth to persist, that the Holocaust was primarily the work of a small group of male fanatics, rather than a systematic program that required thousands of willing participants of both genders. This myth has made it easier for societies to avoid confronting their own capacity for evil and the ordinary people who make extraordinary crimes possible. The story of what happened to female SS guards after World War II isn't a story of justice served or crimes punished. It's a story of systematic failure, missed opportunities, and deliberate forgetting. Most guards escaped punishment not through clever planning or superior resources, but through the simple passage of time and society's willingness to look the other way. Today, virtually all former female SS guards are dead. Their secrets died with them, buried in unmarked graves across Europe and the Americas. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren have no idea what grandmother did during the war. The comfortable myths about female innocence and male guilt remain largely intact, but the documents remain. Court records, personnel files, survivor testimonies, and camp archives provide a detailed picture of female participation in Nazi crimes. These sources reveal that women weren't passive bystanders in the Holocaust. They were active participants who chose to serve the regime and carry out its murderous policies. In 1998, construction workers renovating a house in Hamburg found a trunk in the basement. Inside were documents belonging to a woman who had worked as a guard at Ravensbrück from 1942 to 1945. Personnel records showed she had volunteered for camp duty, completed training in prisoner management, and served as a block leader responsible for over 800 women prisoners. Survivor testimony placed her at selections for the gas chambers and described her beating prisoners with a wooden club. She had lived in that house for 40 years after the war, raised 3 children, and died peacefully in 1986. Her family never knew. The neighbors never suspected. The woman who had helped murder thousands of prisoners became the grandmother who baked cookies and read bedtime stories. She got away with it completely.